Welcome to the Classroombrew podcast. The teacher podcast is a little bit like drunk history. But wait, do you guys actually drink while you record episodes? Yeah, actually. Yeah. Have you done a podcast before? Is this the first one?
Yeah, I did. I've done a few.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done a handful.
Okay. It's nice, right? It's just like relaxing and
Just kind of chatty. Yeah, at least that's how I see it. It's kind of just talking and,
I did do one though where I was like, I'm actually intimidated by this guy. Like it actually kind of scared me. Like they had their research done, and I was like, I didn't know there was that
Someone
much
you were
about me out
interviewing?
there. Someone that I was on theirs.
Oh,
I don't want to
cool.
say who it was. I don't even know if it posted. But when I was done, I was like, I felt like I was working. Like,
Oh, really?
it was scary. Yeah. Welcome back to Classroom Brew. This is episode 116. If you haven't already, rate and review, all that good stuff. You can reach us on social media or email me, classroombrew@gmail.com. For this week, I've actually got an Instagram. Would you count yourself as Instagram famous? I don't even...
No.
I feel like to me you are, because I see all this stuff and I'm like, he's got some cool stuff going on. But we have Paul France on for this one. Thanks for coming down. And
Thanks for having me.
he brought me a nice little Mod Podge of like little beers I can try on the podcast. So you are on Instagram. You're at Paul_Emmerich, right?
Yep.
Is that your middle name?
It's my middle name, yeah.
When you go on Instagram as a teacher, what's like your main goal? Like the first thing that you want to like get across when it comes to posting content?
That's a good question. It's actually something I'm constantly reevaluating, especially right now. What I hope to do is start conversations because I think that's the way we learn is by talking to one another. And I think sometimes that entails just saying what you think.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it entails pushing back on people or pushing back on systems or pushing back just on things that don't feel quite right.
And you do this post too, where it's just like a bunch of big words with like some sort of a statement, or maybe it's just a buzzword, and then you kind of go into detail in the caption, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's what we need to be doing more of in education, is having critical conversations about things that impact our students and things that impact us as teachers. That's what I hope my posts do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they got my attention for the same reason. So I guess a little background though. So right now, you're back in Chicago for this is like the second or third year you're back.
Yeah.
What grade do you teach right now?
I teach third grade.
Okay. So they're not reading the posts. They're not seeing them necessarily.
They are not. No. I hope not.
Have you noticed I know a few of my students, I teach high school.
Yeah.
Some of them, once they become seniors, they know about it and I tell them.
Yeah.
But there were a few like a couple of years ago that were like, hey, what's Classroom Brew? And I was like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah.
God damn it. But have you noticed that like when you post things, like is it stuff that you notice beforehand, or you come to some sort of a thought and then you implement it in your classroom, or what usually comes first with like chicken or the egg right here?
Oh, I don't know if it's either or. Like, I think sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other.
Okay.
I mean, I try not to post recommendations for the classroom that I don't feel like I've tried, but there are some things I talk about that I haven't experienced firsthand.
Okay.
Like I've worked for I've been in public school. I've been in like the business sector, private education, still teaching. And then I've been in private school, nonprofit.
Sure.
But all three of those environments I was working with relatively affluent population, predominantly white students. So you're talking, one subset of American education.
Right.
And so like I talk a lot about, post somewhat about, and I write a lot about equity. And sometimes that entails me writing about, public school systems and communities of color. And even though I have not taught in an environment that is predominantly students of color or predominantly low income or any sort of intersection of those.
Sure.
So when I post about pedagogy, though, I try to post about things that, I have tried, that I've had experienced either success with or that have not worked, to talk about why it doesn't work.
Sure. So now you were in Chicago, you went to San Francisco and stuff like that. And so it's still the same type of population, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So when I was in public school here, it was the suburbs. And then when I went to San Francisco, I was working for a tech company called Alt School, and we were building personalized learning technologies. And so that did attract a different type of family, just in the sense that, cost $30,000 to go to the school a year.
Oh my God. Student loans just for that, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about a population of people that could afford that.
That's true.
So that that gives you some perspective into like the kind of money they're making,
nice. Yeah.
And it was also in, Silicon Valley. So it's a lot of people that were really excited about tech and and everything. And I mean, similarly here in Chicago, I'm working for a private school, and the tuition is similar. So I'm working with predominantly affluent communities, predominantly, white students.
If it's a similar population, what was like the big reason to want to go to San Francisco? Like, was it for this tech job? Was it for the school opportunity? And like, why the decision to come back?
Yeah. Well, so I left Chicago. It's kind of a combination of running from and running to something. Okay. My 4th year in public school in the suburbs, that was actually the year that marriage equality was legalized here in Illinois.
Okay.
And right after the ruling was made public, one of my colleagues wanted to do a lesson on it and share it with the kids. And straight colleague, by the way, that matters to the story. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I kind of knew that it wouldn't go over well with our principal. And at the time, I would not have admitted this, but it's far enough out now, or enough time has elapsed now that I feel comfortable saying this, that like we basically put together a lesson. We informed the parents that we were going to do it in a couple weeks, and we didn't ask for permission from the administration.
You said that in the letter to parents that it wasn't admin approved, or
no, we didn't say it wasn't.
Okay.
We just said we're doing this in 2 weeks. Because of this is a current event and ties with our curriculum in terms of X, Y, and Z. And we didn't ask for permission. We did notify the administration too, and that was really what got us in a lot of trouble. And the reason that I didn't want to notify the administration is because I wanted to do like a ask for forgiveness,
right?
Not permission sort of a thing, which
a lot of times
disclaimer, I would not advise doing. That's not me saying you should go out and do that. Cause I mean, there were a lot of ramifications for me. We got in a lot of trouble.
Really? Just for the content, or was it the way that
it was mostly the way we went about it? But at the end of the day, they wouldn't let us teach the lesson. So it was like, partially the content.
Like if you're doing like Trail of Tears, they're not going to give a shit, but because of the content, it's still kind of in there. That's kind of sad, really.
It was very sad. Actually, the year before that was right when they started doing that, like the excellent rating. Do they still do that?
Oh,
like they do the 4 levels.
Oh shit! Distinguished is now what it's called.
Yeah.
So it was distinguished, proficient, and then
so that was the first year that they started doing that, like in Illinois. And that was the second year. I got it the first year, and the second year, it was like that was the thing that held me back, was that I, tried to do this lesson about LGBT inclusivity in my classroom without asking permission.
That's shitty though. That's like,
oh no, it was. I mean, it was absolutely discriminatory.
Yeah,
absolutely 100%. Was. So anyway. The remainder of the school year was tough because like the superintendent came to talk to me. He didn't go and talk to my straight counterpart who was equally as involved in it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was like, Paul, the classroom's not the place for your personal agendas and that whole kind of thing. And to me, I'm thinking like, well, if we have a female teacher who's advocating for advocating to teach about women's rights, which they absolutely should.
Right. Personal agenda versus
that's not a personal agenda. That's just like, Anyway, so towards the end of the year, I'd like been starting to look for jobs because I was like, I can't handle this.
Right. I feel like I'd be anxious the entire time after that happened. Just like everything I do is going to be scrutinized.
I was anxious. I was angry. I was sad. At the end of the year, my principal wanted to, I was teaching 5th grade at the time, and for a lot of schools, 5th grade is like sex ed.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we're talking about, upcoming sex ed, and my principal comes into one of the meetings, and she's like, I have an idea. And I could tell she was trying, but like, she just didn't see her like heterosexual lens that she was placing over that, over this conversation. She said,
and not that many months removed from when she's saying like, shame on you for doing this lesson.
It was like 6 months after, I want to say. And she said, well, maybe our sex ed unit's a great time to teach about different types of families, like specifically about gay families. And I was like, like that's exactly what we're trying to get away from, is like the first time, like we don't want the first time they learn about LGBT people for it to be sexualized. And especially in this like really uncomfortable, like they're all going to go into sex ed. They know what they're going to learn about.
Right.
It's really uncomfortable to begin with. And like, now let's make that their first exposure to a family with 2 dads or a family with 2 moms.
Right.
And it would just, I was like, I disagree with this. I don't think we should be doing this way. This goes against the whole rationale for teaching them about this in the first place. Yeah. Before sex ed and before they're sexualized, it's just about love and family.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Good for you, by the way, though, standing up. I feel like I would have been too scared to do that.
I should have been scared because she did not like that. She was very upset about it. And then actually the next day, I think it was the next day. It was either the next day or a couple of days after, I was taking my national board test, and I'm glad I didn't see the email until after the test was done. And my team was texting me, and I saw all their texts after I took my test. But she'd emailed and said she wanted to meet with me to go through my classroom library to make sure I didn't have any inappropriate books in there. Jeez. And the implication was very clear that it was gay books or LGBT books.
Yet again, discriminatory.
It was very, So yeah, all those events, I ended up getting my evaluation, and it was, she wrote it in there. Actually, I put her evaluation in my book, which, yeah. Well, because I want people to be able to spot this when they see this stuff. It's
Sure.
you have to know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it's so subtle. It's subtle, but even though it's subtle, it is very abusive and very she did that with intent, and it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily intent to hurt me per se, but it was intent to control.
Yeah, absolutely. Which by default is still
that can be abusive, or it's abusive. So anyway, that whole thing led me to leave Chicago. I was convinced too that I would never work in Chicago again. I had this perception that everybody talked and everybody would know who I was, and she would tell all the principals, and
Sure.
they all had they had some sort of Slack channel or something that they were, which turned out not to be true.
It's called the Chicaluminati or something like that, some made up bullshit.
But anyway, so I found alt school because I was looking to work in tech, in education technology. So I went out there. I ended up getting a job out there, and I went out there, and it was really exciting because we were supposed to be building tech for the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I had been a part of a 1-to-1 pilot and in Glenview where I taught. And
Chromebooks or tablets, or what was it?
iPads, yeah. Okay. So I was just fascinated by education technology. I thought it was the solution,
Sure.
Which was totally my
So you just posted that thing too, where it's the teacher differentiates, not this, and it's someone on an iPad. So
totally, yeah.
You've kind of seen both sides now.
I have, yeah. And so so I worked in Silicon Valley for 3 years, and it's just sometimes I feel like I only have these horror stories, or at least those are the ones I talk about a lot, because it really is just education, and education isn't necessarily a hard place to work. Being a teacher in education is really hard.
Yeah.
I know that sounds a little bit redundant, but there are a lot of people who work in education that aren't teachers, and they're the ones who make it really hard.
Right. Those are the experts, quote unquote. They've never done anything in the classroom ever in their life.
And that was my experience in Silicon Valley, was that all the money, all the resources were in the hands of the people who weren't teaching, And there were just a lot of things along the way. I realized that our hypothesis for personalization was very flawed and not working anywhere in the system the way that they marketed,
Sure.
And I pushed back on it. I mean, I got to the end of the first year there and didn't even recognize my own classroom. I was like, this is not this isn't my classroom. This isn't the way I teach it. This is not me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and it's not that it's about me necessarily, but it's I know better than this.
Sure.
That's where I got.
And not to mention too, so it's going to work for your kids more than anyone else, but also you've already been in the past, the you, in quotes, has already been stifled down and shut down. And that's going to take a toll on how effectively you can promote whatever you want to teach. It could be writing, it could be math, anything. If it's something that you don't believe in or you don't identify with because you've just been told, no, shame on you, don't teach that. It's got to take an effect.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's really good perspective. And I think if I wasn't a gay teacher, I probably wouldn't be as I'm kind of a pain in the ass, honestly. And I don't think I would be if I wasn't gay, because when I first started teaching, I was terrified for anyone to know that I was gay. I was so afraid. Because I was just afraid someone was going to find out, and then all the parents would lose respect for me, or think I was a pedophile or something, or because people think that, out there in the world, so I was terrified of that. And then that thing happened in public school with the marriage equality lesson. And I think it was my first experience like not being the good student. Even growing up, I was always like, I did what all my teachers told me. I loved my teachers.
Right.
I got good grades all the time. Like I was a very compliant student, you know? And that was like one of the first times in my life that I was really just like, this is not okay. And and I don't care what you think. Like I'm pushing back on this. And so it got me to a place in San Francisco where I felt like I'm pushing back on this because I think this is wrong. And, you know, I've now over a 10-year career have learned somewhat how to weather those feelings, you know, like of disappointing people or of people being upset with me, whether it's publicly or privately. It's not always easy, but
we constantly have to like something happens, we like look to somebody, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah, totally. So yeah.
Does this include like even in like department meetings too, where you're like hesitant to speak up there? Or is this like a major initiative is brought into the classroom and you're like, you know what, guys, I got something to say?
I think it's a matter of picking your battles. Mm-hmm. You can't be the squeaky wheel for everything, you know, because otherwise then you're just like telling everybody what not to do.
Right.
And you're not actually telling, which is actually a major point of reflection for me as of late, because I think I have done a lot of that. I think I have provided a lot of the contrarian perspective like on Instagram.
In your
I think just in my everyday life too. And I'm trying to be more mindful and aware of finding the positive things and finding the things that I see that are working. Yeah. Because you can't really build relationships, right, if you're just pointing out the negative things. Mm-hmm. And that's what like right now, if I were to say like that's the thing I'm learning right now at this very point in time.
It almost sounds like when you do like a parent conference for that one kid that you're like, son of a bitch. So you start with the positive and then you go to the negative. It's almost like that, but kind of weathering whether or not to say that negative.
Yeah.
But with adults.
Yeah. I think that, it's, I think what it is it's putting the relationship first.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that bothers me most about Instagram is I think people who post a lot, people who are putting, you know, controversial ideas out there, people who are, you know, doing more than just posting selfies and, you know, you're like opening your brain up for criticism. You're opening yourself up, your brain up, your identity up for criticism, right?
Yeah.
And what bothers me is I'm sure there would be some people out there that will tell you this is not true about me, but I know in my heart of hearts that when I see someone out there who's like really engaging in the work and who's being vulnerable with their ideas, with themselves, who is like, you know, for all intents and purposes, fighting the good fight. Mm-hmm. I absolutely can take criticism from them, you know?
Okay. You see merit in what they offer.
Yeah. Cause I know it's coming from a place of wisdom and like, not to say that anyway. So where I was going with that was that, you know, one of the reasons why social media is really tough is because there are people that they kind of lurk in the comments, you know, they troll, and I say this to weaving in that reflection I just mentioned, like I want to be less contrarian. I want to find the positives more. Like I see that behavior in myself sometimes, or I have seen it because I think social media can bring that out in people. So I don't want to say it like I'm not susceptible to it or I've never been guilty of it. But so what's hard for me on social media is the like comment lurkers and the, you know, that it's hard to take criticism there when you don't see people out there that are doing the work and, you know.
Well, especially too, like it's hard to take it in general because you don't know who they are. But then because they know that you don't know who they are, they kind of ramp it up a little bit. They turn the dial up a little extra more.
I mean, social media doesn't afford that courtesy to all of us, right? Somewhat of anonymity. Even a well-known person, you don't know them personally.
Right.
You know their image.
Do you ever get tired of like maintaining or whatever with Instagram or like whatever the conversation is, or just in general the act of doing it?
I'm so tired. Yeah, I'm so tired right now.
In this moment. Like,
no, I mean like it. So because recently I posted something recently about like influencer culture, and it like totally blew up in my face. And you know, I think some of it was warranted. I think some of it, you know, I was calling out the kind of like ad culture and like people getting followers just so they can push ads, you know, and you know, somebody pushed back and said that, well, some people do this to make ends meet because teachers don't get paid enough. And I thought, well, okay, that's like,
That's a point.
that's something that I'm sure that exists out there. I'm sure that there are some people out there that need to do that. I still think there's some like nuance there. That's like, it's not as simple as people can push ads because they have student debt to pay off or because they have bills. I think I saw my, I'm trying to say the word blind spot anymore because people are saying that's like ableist language, but you know,
Oh,
I
wow.
saw my,
Didn't think of that.
yeah, I saw my like my privilege, I guess, you know, because I don't need, I shouldn't say I don't need to, because like my family too has 6-figure student debt. It's not like it's like whatever. But like in my day to day, do I need to push ads to make extra money? No, I don't.
Is part of it just like because it's everywhere, like, and it's just like you listen to a podcast and you hear it every 5 seconds, or
Yeah.
there's always some, like everyone wants to be a brand, or is it what comes behind it? That's more.
For me, it's that I feel like education has become so commercialized,
Yeah.
and that teachers are kind of objects of capitalism. We have been, the whole system is, right? Like it's a system that in some ways is meant to like create people who will fill jobs, or grow people who will fill jobs, right? And so when I saw teachers like pushing ads for things to other teachers who probably can't afford to buy the things that they're pushing anyway,
Right.
which feels a little bit like,
And this is anything from like software to like those little bins, I think is what you were posting about,
no,
right?
I'm talking about any type of product. Like people push all types of products online. But yes, that kind of stuff too. It's like you're pushing things to a group of people that are probably, that you're saying are already strapped for cash. So it feels a little tone deaf to do that, you know? So anyway, you asked if I was exhausted by Instagram. I absolutely am, because when stuff like blows up in your face, it's like, wow, like this is exhausting. But it also, like, on the other hand, I don't want to like let myself off the hook. Like when I post something, I have to be accountable for what I post.
Sure.
You know, I have to make sure that when I'm posting something, I am as aware as I can be of the privilege, any privilege that I have, whether it's my white privilege or, you know, whether it's my male privilege or whether it's my, I think financial privilege is really hard to prove or hard to identify in anyone, but I just have to be aware of those things.
Sure.
So
Do you think it's something where, like, thinking about Instagram and things like that, because you can actually express who you are, your identity. So you got married to your now husband, and you had some backlash, like in like the months leading up to your wedding, where like some person that, and you didn't know this person, right? But they just still found a way. Do you think it becomes more of a hindrance for your ability to post or want to be on Instagram, or is it more of this is a place I can also express who I am as a teacher, as a gay man, as whatever you choose to put on there? Or
I think in terms of being an out teacher, Instagram has been it's been great for that.
Oh, good.
Because for every one person who pushes back, hundreds, thousands even of people are supportive.
Good. That's nice. That's nice to hear.
So that has been great. And I think actually you'll see that on teacher Instagram, that like there is a community that is really dedicated to social justice. And I think it offers a sense of community, because a lot of times teachers who are pursuing social justice or anti-bias or anti-racist work in their schools are in the minority. Yeah. And I don't mean like in a racial minority necessarily. A lot of them are, but like, I mean, like they're just in a minority of people who are pursuing that work. And so to have a community of people who are doing the work and who are talking about mistakes they've made, or like, hey, be more aware of something like blind spot, right? Ableist language.
Phrase. Like, simple to us, I should say.
Yeah, that's something, like those are the types of things that I've learned from being on Instagram, which I think does keep me coming back, you know?
How often do you think you're on it, like on Instagram? Like, is it something where it's... You're like, I'm scrolling right now.
Yeah.
I feel like it's exhausting for me, and I'm not that big on Instagram.
Well, that's kind of like the fatal flaw of social media, right? And of that sort of personalized tech in general, is that like you have to be on it a lot for it to work.
Yeah, that's true.
So you have to be on it a lot for it to like send you things that you're going to like, you know, and you have to be on it a lot to find people to follow. And then you have to check in on those people that you follow. And it becomes somewhat of a job.
Sure. Watch as I'm like taking notes. Like, all right, find and sell anything to teachers.
Yeah. It's so I am on it a lot. I'm on it way too much. My husband will tell you I'm on it way too much. And he was like, after this recent kind of blow up, he was like, this doesn't really make you happy. Why are you doing this? And I was like, I think I need to reconnect with that, you know? And I think it's really easy to fall into a trap of measuring yourself by the number of followers and likes. I know I've fallen into that trap. And I think anyone who says they haven't fallen into that trap is lying to themselves, honestly.
Right.
So it's a lot of time.
And I think that Instagram, not in the US, but somewhere, and they're thinking about doing it in the US, is getting rid of like being able to see likes and followers or something, right? For that exact purpose. Like, now I don't know how it's going to work if like people are talking about advertising and sponsors, but I heard they're getting rid of that for that very purpose.
Probably for the best.
I mean, yeah, honestly, when I first started the podcast, for example, I didn't have an Instagram, then I did eventually. And then it was like, all right, got to get that number up. And then you have to download not have to, but I used to have this app that would track like who is and isn't following you, and if they drop off, and it's crazy. There's like a million apps for this thing.
And there's also like, there's a psychological component to that that's very unhealthy. And I think like
the reciprocity of it, or
like constantly checking on who's following you and who's not following you. You know, like that's, I think, psychologically unhealthy. I'm saying that having been in that place where I was doing that. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And I had to delete it. I can't do this anymore.
I think that's, you know, in some ways, it was one of the contributing factors to, like, I'm really talking about the last couple weeks. But I think that was one of the contributing factors to me. Like, I think I was posting too flippantly. I was posting kind of like one-liners and stuff that like, because I wanted to make an impact, you know, I wanted to like catch people's attention. And I think that's what social media does to a lot of people. It's like, you only have so much space. You only have this image, like you got to grab people's attention within 3 seconds because all of our attention spans are so short, you know?
Right.
And I think in some ways then, you know, Instagram, Twitter, social media in general is changing the way we measure success in teaching, you know, especially for those of us who are engaged online and in education. I said that recently online, and someone very prominent pushed back on that and said, you know, that this is, you know, a really small subset of people. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it may be a smaller subset of the teaching population. I don't know the exact percentage or whatever, but it's still like a small ripple can change an entire system.
Yeah.
And that's what I see social media doing, because it's growing and growing and growing, especially in the teaching world, especially as veteran teachers get phased out and new teachers come in. I mean, teachers are coming out of college and starting an Instagram teacher account. Like, that is like part of what teachers, that is, was not what I was thinking about 10 years ago when I started teaching.
Right.
And it's not necessarily bad that people are starting social media accounts. It's just that, you know, what's being done with it isn't really, it's only making education more and more of a business, because people are thinking, if I start an Instagram account, I can acquire all these followers, then I can get ad promotions and I can create products to sell to other teachers online. And I just think there's something slightly problematic about that we're not talking about, because the people who have the most followers and that are benefiting from that aren't going to talk about that.
Right. And I think I was looking through it too. You really don't post about your classroom, like almost at all on your page. Have you ever?
It's really hard to, you know, because I've been reading all this stuff. I mean, a teacher on Instagram posts a lot about FERPA.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like the Privacy Act. And, you know, I'm trying not to post specific things about my classroom because I don't want to identify anybody, you know?
Right.
You know, I also find, and this is again where I need to reevaluate and reconnect with what I'm doing. People don't care about what you're doing in your classroom.
I mean, yeah.
They don't.
True.
You know, it's like the things that get the most likes on my Instagram are pictures of me and my husband. I mean, he's very handsome, so positive. Sure. But like, or, you know, when I make these kind of big statements about something related
in
to
a negative way,
justice.
positive way, or is it just in general the most attention on social media?
Both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, both. And I think, I don't know, I do see some teachers out there that do get a lot of traction for social justice inspired posts. And I think that's great, because I think it's needed. I think people need to get fired up about that. But I don't see a ton of people getting fired up about like, I did this great lesson today and it worked because, you know, this like look at these student samples and blah, blah, blah,
Right. Unless they have a cool accent. Like there's an Australian teacher I followed as she posts stuff. I'm like, I have to see her teach these little kids how to speak Australian accents. But
yeah, I think people just are not as interested in like the things that really make our classrooms go, and that like makes me really sad. And that's really at the heart of my criticisms about influencer culture and Instagram, which I need to be better about communicating. I need to find a way to refine that message and like make it more palatable and like make it more, help people see that, because that's really why we're here. Right? We're here to reach kids on a personal level.
In terms of your classroom then, because you don't post a lot about it for that reason, but what are some things that you are really invested in that you care about with your kids? It's a very loaded question, of course. But.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think the thing I care about most is agency, autonomy, independence.
Okay.
Those all are different terms, but they're all related to one another. Because I think at the heart of culturally responsive pedagogy, at the heart of personalized learning is student autonomy, agency, independence. It's like a liberation kind of thing, right? In order for kids to be their true selves, they have to learn how to make decisions on their own, in their own skin, using their own background knowledge and their own lived experiences to make those decisions and learn. And that is what's most important to me. And that also, too, when you're talking about that, you get into a more theoretical place. It's like you're not necessarily talking about the student work or the, it's
the
which
stuff
is
that you
that's
can't
like,
show on the stuff that they evaluate us on.
Right.
Is all the theoretical stuff that matters.
Absolutely. And that is a theme in my book. Like I write about personalized learning, and a lot of people think personalized learning is, a lot of people define personalized learning as technology powered or technology driven individualization of curriculum. And having worked for a personalized learning company and seeing the ways of thinking that shape the tools that are, I think, reductive and uninformed. Now I believe that like personalized learning is about helping a student shape their own education, because which is actually, to tie it back into social media, right? Like social media is personalized, not because the company necessarily is doing it on your behalf. Social media becomes personalized because you are entering data every time you open that phone. Every time you stop over a picture, every time you double click on a picture, every time you comment on a picture, every time you like look up something, right? They're collecting data, and they're using the data that you enter to shape your feed. So really, you're the one that's shaping your feed.
Yeah.
Right?
And you can even see it too, how they categorize you if you look close enough in your settings and things like that.
And so I think like personalization in our classrooms should work the same way, just not with digital tech.
Right. Not using it in that weird,
but that
way.
Like kids should be shaping their own, because that is what makes something personal, when someone has a hand in shaping their own education. Now, that I don't think that means that like all kids should be building all their own lessons and like choosing to learn whatever they want to learn about, because I think we as the teachers are responsible for knowing that like, hey, in third grade, it's really important that you learn your math facts. That's important.
Right.
And I actually don't care if you want to learn that or not.
Yeah.
Because I know it's going to help you later. My job is to make you see that it's relevant and to engage you in it and to help you, connect with it in some way. But like, anyway, so that is what I really care about, is autonomy, agency. And I think it links so closely to culturally responsive pedagogy and just helping every child step into their own shoes and be their best selves, really, and any child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the book itself too. So you talk about like it's personalized learning, things like that, but you also, it's including stuff about how to know if an employer is basically discriminating against you for whatever reason. What's the title of the book, by the way? I forgot to ask.
The title of the book is Reclaiming Personalized Learning.
Okay.
And so one of the first questions a lot of people ask me is, why are we reclaiming it? What is there to be claimed or reclaimed? And from my 3 years working in San Francisco for a tech company, I was able to see that education technology has claimed personalized learning as their own. They've claimed it and branded it as you need to buy our tools in order to personalize in your classroom. And by the end of my time there, I saw that it wasn't the tools that were personalizing, it was the teachers, and that when you look at that word personalizing, right? Like the base of that word is person, it's about a person, it's about people. And what tech companies do, and it's usually, it's usually motivated by usually profit motivated. It's like they're trying to make money off of the education system or the families or the students.
Yeah.
They have claimed this as their own because they can say like, look, this is personalized because every child gets their own set of activities, or every child gets their own very specific activity. And so I argue that, this is bad for a number of reasons. One, when you have kids all working on something different in the classroom, or you have them all staring at screens, it's chipping away at human connection in the classroom, which I think that's incredibly critical to learning. But then also, these tools that are being built, they're not cheap. Mm-hmm. And they're being marketed to lots of schools, but you hear about, urban public school districts. Actually, Chicago is one of the like hubs of personalized learning in the country. Mm-hmm. I just recently learned this. I had no idea. And you see that they're targeting a lot of urban schools that serve predominantly students of color, because they're talking about quote unquote achievement gaps and how to close these achievement gaps. And
I feel like I talk about that every day working in a school. It's exactly like that. But
and so I'm reading right now Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he specifically talks about, how racism is embedded everywhere in our culture, everywhere. But specifically in that term of the achievement gap, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you look at the like quote unquote, again, I'm trying to do air quotes here, quote unquote, because I don't believe the achievement gap is a real thing. They talk about the achievement gap between, Black students and white students. And really that quote unquote achievement gap, or like those differences in test scores, are the result of opportunity gaps that are the results of systemic racism that we can trace back centuries, And so it's kind of disgusting when you think about it, that like personalized learning companies are capitalizing on that. And actually, schools, school systems, school districts are spending money on these personalized learning tools to quote unquote close achievement gaps that are really symptomatic of systemic racism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're not actually doing anything to personalized learning tools. Tech companies are not actually doing anything to treat like what's at the root of that, which is like systemic inequity. They're just trying to solve a superficial problem by having people spend money on their tools so they can profit off of it. Well, it's kind of sick.
Like if you simplify it too, let's say they fix the quote unquote achievement gap. What happens to their business? Like tobacco companies, for example. Like you don't want to make them too deadly, because then you run out of customers very quickly. It's a very stark version. I'm clearly not going to get sponsored by one of these tech companies, but
me neither.
But yeah, it makes sense. That's their whole customer base, and then the longer you can drag it out,
in a way, if you're a business person, from a business person's perspective, it's brilliant because you create a reliable revenue stream, and you create it. Either you create these tools that you want to scale out to the whole country, or you create something that's subscription based. So you have to pay for it every year, which a lot of tech.
A lot of stuff that I get recommended is all subscription based.
Totally. So it's just, when you zoom out and you think about it in that way, it's just like, wow, that is actually what's going on. I think that's why agency and autonomy and independence are most important to me, because like when you, like, we have to work within the system, right? And when you're talking about being an anti-racist educator and actually like getting to the root of the problems that face education, it's systemic inequity, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this book I read, a lot of people have read it. It's a great book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. And she talks about the difference between independent and dependent learners. And that oftentimes in schools that serve historically marginalized populations, because they're trying to treat these quote unquote achievement gaps, they try to teach kids in like the most efficient way they can think of, which is like that very didactic, everybody sits in rows and listens and regurgitates type of teaching, which only fosters dependence on the teacher. And dependent learners leave their school systems unable to learn on their own and solve problems on their own and take care of themselves on their own, Right. And so she argues that like one of the most important things in culturally responsive teaching is fostering independence. Mm-hmm. And so that links to personalized learning in the sense that like, if your learning's personalized, but you're fostering dependence, then you're not actually doing anyone a service at all.
Yeah. do you ever get tired of like between Instagram and then obviously your career? And I don't know if you still do stuff with ed tech companies, probably not, I'm assuming, but do you ever get tired of just like talking about education stuff as we talk on a podcast that's related to that?
I actually don't, which is actually, that was like my now husband's biggest criticism of me when we first started dating. There was one night we were out and he just looked at me. He's like, can we just talk about something else other than school? And I was like, maybe. I'm not sure if I can do that. I don't know what it is. It's like when you become fascinated by something, you're just fascinated by it. And I'm just fascinated by education. I'm fascinated by how kids learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just think that's so cool.
Yeah.
Like I'm teaching them math facts right now, and just getting them to do it in a way, like talk about independence again, right? Like getting them to do it in a way where they're actually thinking critically about, why is 3 times 5 3 times 5?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's so cool to watch them grapple with that and then slowly become more efficient with that. So I'm fascinated by that. And I could talk about that for days.
It's probably a good sign. Like, you're clearly invested into it. Like,
yeah.
I got in an Uber once with a guy that, and I didn't initiate this conversation, but he was talking about how he used to date a principal. And he's like, yeah, I had to leave her, man, because she just wouldn't stop talking about her job. And I was like, you might not have your same passion about being an Uber driver, but like maybe this lady likes what she's doing. But it's probably a good sign, like at the end of the day.
I think too, it's like, I agree. I think it is good for us to learn how to separate from it, though. And I'm glad that my husband said that to me then, because
a little tough love to
I mean, he's the sweetest guy, so he said it in a way that was just like,
okay.
I need to talk about something else other than and it mirrored it back to me like, wow, I really do let this consume me. And so passions don't have to consume you, right? You can be passionate about something and then you can go home and like sit on the couch and like watch This Is Us. And like not think about your job for a couple hours,
Right. Even with the guilt that we get on like social media and stuff, but yeah.
I mean, that's a problem, right? That there's like this perception of teachers. It's like that savior mentality, right? That we're supposed to just give up everything to teach, and it really shouldn't be just on our backs to fix the system, Yeah. But that's the other thing that fascinates me about teaching is the system. There's so much wrong with it, and it fascinates me how we find all of these things to talk about other than the system. Like we find personalized learning,
right.
Or we find
stuff that's still in the same shape or structure that we try to work around rather than fixing the structure.
We find people to blame too, which I think we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty of doing that. No, it's your fault. You're doing this wrong. And that's why this isn't working. And it's this huge system that we're in that just doesn't serve everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not built to.
Now, I had to ask, and that we can always pause for time too, but has there ever been a moment, because you've been teaching for a while now.
10 years,
which is awesome. Like, I'm hoping I get to that point, obviously, but has there ever been a moment that just stands out there like, holy shit, how did I, like, what do I do now? Like, it could be student related, or you had the one with the admin, of course, but anything in the classroom when you're like, oh God, like, can't wait to talk about this on Ryan's podcast in 10 years. Like, my second day of teaching, I turned around and there was a kid in the class and I said, just go to class, man. And he goes, fuck you. I'm going to teach you, like something like that, like some crazy shit. We were like, oh, stepped in it.
Oh my God. I think that happens every year. No, really. Multiple times. It's like you have moments where you're like, why am I doing this? Because I think kids, the way I get through it is, I'll go back to those moments in a second, but the way I get through it is I always try to remember that when a kid does something, it's like everything a kid does is an assessment. It's like, or it's giving you information about them.
Right.
And you have to remember that when a kid does something like that, it's like there's a reason they're doing that. It's something they don't know how to do, or it's because of something they don't know how to do, or it's because of something that happened to them. Mm-hmm. Something that happened to them that they don't know how to cope with, right? Mm-hmm. And it sucks as a teacher because you're like, that was so disrespectful. I can't believe that kid said that to me. Right. I experience that very, very often, very often.
Even in a school that like affluent families too, right?
Oh yeah. I think, I don't want to paint a picture of like what was me because I'm very lucky. Mm-hmm. I'm very, very lucky. I work for a school that supports my autonomy, that is well funded. So I can take my kids on cool field trips, and like I can be inventive with my curriculum, and and I have so many supportive families, that would bend over backwards for me, so this is not like a woe is me. I just think every community has their obstacles.
Oh, definitely.
And I think in an affluent community, it's the more money you make, mostly, doesn't apply to everybody, but like, you have more people doing things for you. You have less barriers. And so when you teach kids in affluent communities, they have less barriers to things. So they have less resilience, They are accustomed to, well, mom ordered it on Amazon last night and it just came on my doorstep,
Right.
They're just more accustomed to those things. And so what I notice in my populations that I work with is like, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of impulsivity, and those are the things that I spend a lot of time teaching.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm benefited in terms of, I have very few kids that struggle with reading. Very few. I have very few kids that struggle with really any of the academics, and so I can do a lot with that. But there are other things that are challenging too.
Yeah. Executive skills and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I had a kid tell me the other day too. So we recently had to hire a civics teacher for the position. And it's a student that I've had. This is like the 4th class I've had him in since he's been in high school. And he just turns to me and goes, Mr. F, I like civics and all, and don't take this the wrong way, but I'm just so tired of talking about this country. That's a great, me too, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was one of those great quotes, but
I got to say too, that's one of the cool things about working for a private school is I have the opportunity to shape the curriculum so we can talk about, I'm sure we don't get as deep as, high schoolers do. But, we do have some really cool conversations about race, about identity. We're actually studying Chicago right now. We study Chicago all year, but right now we're studying Chicago history. And so we learn about just like some key points in Chicago history. We learn about like the population boom in the 1800s when lots of immigrants came and some of the like anti-immigrant propaganda that was being pushed out at that time. We learn about the Great Migration, which is like when lots of Black Americans from the South came up to the North. We learned about Jim Crow and, like whatever. All these things that I don't think a typical 3rd grader would learn about,
Definitely not.
We actually in the winter term, like January to March, we do a neighborhood study and we go to Uptown and we learn about the strengths of Uptown, but we learn about the challenges they face. And we talk about affordable housing and gentrification and all these really cool things, And
again, 3rd graders.
Right.
That's awesome.
But so one of my 3rd graders the other day, we were talking about race in conjunction with our lessons on the Great Migration. And we have thinking journals in our classroom. And so I'll give them a prompt and they'll just write, And one of them said, Mr. France, I noticed that there's so many Black football players. I said, yeah, tell me more about that. He said, yeah, I just wonder why there are so many Black football players. So that's an interesting thing to wonder. I wonder that too. He said, oh, and now I think about it. He's like, except for like Tom Brady and, and so he started listing, I don't know anything about sports, but I can't remember the names he mentioned, but he listed off like these quarterbacks and he said, oh, except for like these guys. Oh, and they're quarterbacks. And I wonder if it's because like them and the coaches are like the leaders of the team. And I wonder if that's like segregation. And like, granted, there's some terminology there that he's not quite understanding yet, but the fact that our lessons and our discussions about race and the autonomy that my school gives me to talk about that stuff supported him in identifying something that's really important to him, football.
Yeah. And
noticing the like racial dynamic in football. I was like, good for you, buddy.
Yeah, that's such a cool light bulb moment.
Yeah, and that's personalized learning, right? Like that is so personal to him, and it's weaving in that thing that I want him to learn about, which is race and privilege. So there are so many benefits to like having that. I guess I don't have to tell teachers that. There are a lot of benefits to having that autonomy, and like and being in a setting like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul, thanks for coming over.
Yeah, of course.
I know it's different than Instagram, but you're a podcast pro at this point. But how do you like doing the longer format?
I like this a lot better than Instagram, actually.
He's gonna start his podcast.
Actually, have a conversation. Yeah, it's great.
A lot better. Yeah. Well, thanks again for being on, though. Everybody else, thanks so much for listening. You can check out Paul at what's the Instagram?
Paul_Emmerich.
As we plug the Instagram talking about
Yeah.
the podcast. So you can check out Paul's content. He posts a lot of really cool stuff. A lot of stuff that's really uplifting and realistic, really pointing out the sides of teaching that I think we need a little bit more of, especially today. So thanks so much for listening. You can reach us at classroombrew on social media. There's my social media plug, classroombrew@gmail.com. You can send me a voice memo. If you want to be on the show too, that works as well. Hit that rating and review. And until next week, class dismissed.